Good evening, YouTube, and welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over the biggest snubs of the 2022 NFL Pro Bowl. In this video, I'm going to be going over a lot of the players who did make the Pro Bowl and players who I think should have beaten them for those Pro Bowl spots. This year, there weren't a lot of people I really thought got snubbed, but there was a lot of people that I really thought shouldn't have been in it. There were four people specifically I thought really should not have been in it, and then there's two people who I really think it was less of that the other person shouldn't have been in it and more of that they really deserved it. Every year the Pro Bowl obviously has people that don't make it who should because it's fan voting mostly, and because it's mostly fan voting, you're a lot of times going to get perennial Pro Bowlers or players that people hear, oh, that's the name, that's the guy. And once they hear those names and those names get rotated into the system, they're more and more likely to get in, even if they don't have the best stats in the world. You still need great stats and you still need to be a great player in order to get in, obviously. But perennial Pro Bowlers are more likely to get in than someone trying to get in for the first time. So we're going to start off with quarterbacks. The quarterbacks were really the place I had the biggest issue with. Lamar Jackson in the AFC and Kyler Murray in the NFC were the two third-string quarterbacks for the Pro Bowl this season. Now, obviously, some of the other people listed could get in if one of the Pro Bowl quarterbacks makes the Super Bowl, which is more than likely. But in the AFC and the NFC, there are at least three quarterbacks who I believe should have gotten in before their respective third strings currently in the Pro Bowl. Starting with the AFC, we have Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson only has 2,882 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 13 interceptions on the season. He has a passer rating of 87, and he has 767 rushing yards and 2 rushing touchdowns. I think the argument for Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray is they both had injuries, and if they were to have played full seasons, then they would be in. Also, Lamar Jackson's injury was much later in the season, so he hadn't been injured by the time most of the people were making their Pro Bowl votes, as Kyler Murray had been injured, which is the difference. So Lamar Jackson had not been injured at the time, but still, looking at his stats, it's still clear that the other players on this list have had better seasons. Josh Allen currently has over 4,000 yards, 34 touchdowns, and 12 interceptions, with a pass rating of 96.6, 619 rushing yards, and 4 rushing touchdowns. Josh Allen is clearly, in my opinion, the number 3 string in the AFC for Pro Bowls for quarterbacks. Joe Burrow and Carson Wentz have a different argument, but Josh Allen would have been higher on my list when Lamar Jackson got injured, and still definitely is. He has almost the same number of rushing yards, more rushing touchdowns, twice as many touchdowns, less interceptions, a passer rating of 10 higher, and over 1,000 more yards. Joe Burrow, a lot of his stats came in the most recent weeks. So that being said, most of the Pro Bowl voting had ended by the time he started to pick up. But he still is having a much better season than Lamar, and still was definitely snubbed. He has 30 touchdowns, 14 picks, 105 passer rating, 2 rushing touchdowns, and 4,200 yards. Carson Wentz, the reason why he's on here is mostly because of his impressive touchdown to interception ratio, but 25 touchdowns is still much better than 16. He has more passing yards, he has half the interceptions, and a rushing touchdown. I don't think Carson Wentz should have made the Pro Bowl. I don't think Joe Burrow should have made the Pro Bowl, but I still think both of them should have made it over Lamar. Kyler Murray is the other quarterback. This one I have a bigger issue with because he was injured before Pro Bowl voting was over. Lamar Jackson got injured around the time it ended. Matthew Stafford, I believe, should have definitely made the Pro Bowl. He has almost twice the touchdowns as Murray does, only 3 extra interceptions, more yards per game, a better passer rating, 1,000 more yards. And although Kyler Murray does have 5 rushing touchdowns, even if you add those to his passing, Matthew Stafford still has 10 more touchdowns. He's been a clear impact on his team as he came here, and their offense has dominated. Cooper Kupp is currently potentially having an MVP campaign, and Matthew Stafford is in the MVP conversation. He didn't even make the Pro Bowl, and he could potentially get the MVP depending on how the season ends. Kirk Cousins has almost 4,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, and just 7 interceptions. This is a very similar argument to Carson Wentz, where his passing stats aren't quite as phenomenal as the other players there, but he still has an impressive touchdown-interception ratio. He has a decent number of yards a game, less touchdowns on the ground, but more touchdowns through the air, which is what I believe matters for quarterbacks. And he has better stats overall than Kyler Murray over the last 2 seasons. Murray has 2 Pro Bowls, and he only has 0. Dak Prescott has almost the same number of yards as Cousins. He played 1 less game. He has 1 less touchdown, a couple more picks, and 280 yards a game. Still not a Pro Bowl season, I don't think. I think Kirk Cousins and Matthew Stafford would deserve it before Dak Prescott, but still better than Kyler Murray so far. The next big issue I have is the running backs. Nick Chubb and Alvin Kamara both made it. But I'm going to first talk about players I think that should have gotten in above them, and then I'm going to talk about some players that are comparable that also didn't make it. Austin Eckler clearly should have made it above Nick Chubb. He has more yards. He has twice as many touchdowns. And I know Nick Chubb only played 12 games, but that's only 3 less than Austin Eckler. And you can't say that in 3 more games he would have gotten 8 extra touchdowns and a significant number more yards. Again, availability is the best ability. Austin Eckler has been fantastic for his team, both in the rushing and passing game. And being that versatile running back, being able to give both of those options definitely is Pro Bowl worthy, with 17 total touchdowns. Ezekiel Elliott has 12 touchdowns and 1,200 scrimmage yards compared to Alvin Kamara's 1,075 yards and 8 touchdowns. Again, Elliott has played 2 or 3 more games than Kamara has, but availability is the best ability. And Kamara is a receiving back, and Elliott has almost as many receiving yards as him with more rushing yards. Elliott is very consistent, even though a lot of people think that he's getting old or that he isn't as good as he used to be. He still put up 12 touchdowns, which is 4 more than Kamara, and he had a phenomenal season this year. Kamara missing games and Nick Chubb missing games, I don't think that they should be able to make the Pro Bowl if they miss 3 or 4 games in a season. That being said, Cordell Patterson is a player with very comparable stats to Kamara, a very split back between rushing and receiving. He had more yards per attempt than Kamara by far, or more yards per touch, not attempt, more yards per touch. More scrimmage yards, more touchdowns, more everything. He played more games, but he played better, and he was a bigger impact for his team. He was their team's entire offense in the passing and rushing game. He also returns kickoffs, and I believe he's a third-string safety. Derrick Henry is the comparison to have to Nick Chubb. I'm not in any universe saying Derrick Henry should have made the Pro Bowl, but that's because if you miss that many games, you shouldn't. And Nick Chubb, sure, he missed 3 games, but Derrick Henry still had more touchdowns and almost as many yards, and he missed 7 games. Derrick Henry missed 4 extra games than Nick Chubb, and he had almost as many yards and more touchdowns. If your argument is that Nick Chubb would have done better than Eckler over the course of the entire season had he not been injured, then Derrick Henry should also be in that argument. Also, Derrick Henry wasn't even on the Pro Bowl voting list because of his injury. If Nick Chubb wasn't on the list because of his injury, then he wouldn't be here. If Derrick Henry was on the list, then he definitely would have beaten Nick Chubb in the voting for the Pro Bowl. I can almost guarantee it. Either way, Austin Eckler deserves it over both of them, but I still think that it's terrible that Nick Chubb got in. Defensive backs. I just did this as one category because there's only really 2 disagreements I have. And it's less of the fact that these people should have gotten in above the other people, but more of the fact that they just should have gotten in. Kenny Moore and Darius Slay are the cornerbacks. Darius Slay got in, Kenny Moore did not. And they have very similar stats for coverage stats. Kenny Moore has more targets. They have similar completion percentages, similar yards per attempt, identical passer ratings against. If you look at the other stats, though, Kenny Moore has more than double the tackles, more passes defended, more interceptions, more sacks, more forced fumbles. Darius Slay did have a very impressive interception return for a touchdown, but I think that Kenny Moore had a more impressive season overall. Either way, Darius Slay definitely deserved a Pro Bowl, but I think that Kenny Moore was definitely snubbed as well. As for safeties, I think that Derwin James is definitely the weaker argument between him and Tyrann Mathieu. But either way, Jordan Poyer should have definitely gotten in over one of these two. 39 targets, so less targets than the other two, but receptions barely even over half. Only 205 yards against, 0 touchdowns, and a pass rating against of 29.3. On top of that, he had 9 passes defended and 5 interceptions. The same number of interceptions as both of them combined, and almost as many passes defended as both of them combined. He also had a sack. The argument for both Derwin James and Tyrann Mathieu over Jordan Poyer is the fact that they both have 3 fumble recoveries. Derwin James has more tackles than Jordan Poyer does, but and Tyrann Mathieu has 1 more pick than Derwin James and more passes defended. But Jordan Poyer dominated in the coverage stats with a 29.3 passer rating against. The other two are almost identical at 68.3 and 68.2 respectively. But either way, whether he got in above Tyrann Mathieu or Derwin James, it's a shame that Jordan Poyer did not make the Pro Bowl this year. So those are my big snubs of the 2022 NFL Pro Bowl. I don't really know a lot about centers, so I didn't really comment on them. And I think that a lot of the other positions were really good, especially for the wide receiver position. If you think that there's anyone that I missed, make sure to comment down below. If you have any big disagreements with anything that I said, I'd love to hear it. And thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.